Welcome to the Inspired Action Podcast. This is where we have motivational, inspiring conversations and interviews that we hope you'll enjoy listening to. If you're interested in creating more balance in your life, understanding your 5-element energetic nature, finding the path of greatest ease,
or releasing the baggage of this lifetime and discovering ancient alchemy that can help you fly in your life, join us and other inspired actioneers on this alchemical, transformational journey.
Welcome to the Inspired Action Podcast. My name is Jay, and this is Pod 62. I'm here with my co-host, Lita Herman.
Welcome back, Inspired Actioneers. Today, we're going to continue our podcast series on the 5 Daoist Virtues for finding your authentic self.
Yes, and this is part of our Happy on the Way to Happiness series. And today, Lita, on Pod 62, we're recording from a very secret remote location, which shall go nameless. We might sound a little different, and you might hear some stuff in the background. But we're going to do our best to keep it like normal.
Yes.
But not normal.
Yes.
Like abnormal. Extraordinary.
Isn't every podcast extraordinary?
Just a little bit. So today on the Inspired Action Podcast, we will take on the 5th virtue of the 5 Daoist virtues, which is, are you ready, Lita?
Yes.
Are you sure you want to hear it?
I'm sure.
Are you ready for it?
Yes.
Acceptance.
Or you could call it surrender. But a lot of people get triggered by the word surrender, so we decide to go for the word acceptance.
And this is the virtue associated with the water element.
And we've been talking about these virtues of Chinese philosophy for the last few podcasts. So if you're just joining us, there are actually 2 sets of virtues. One that society gives to us as we're growing up as children.
And those are benevolence, morality, social compliance, loyalty, and trust. Society gives us these virtues at a very early age through parenting, schooling, elders, so we really can't escape them.
And then there's a second set of virtues that comes from Taoism, which we believe is key to your individual happiness.
And those virtues are courage, which is associated with the wood element, authority, which is associated with the fire element, gratitude, which is associated with the earth element, forgiveness, which is associated with the metal element, which is we did our last podcast 61 on, and today is acceptance, which is the water element virtue. These are what we're talking about here on this particular podcast. We kind of try to really embrace these, specifically the 5th one, the water element, Lita.
Yes, and these new virtues are virtues we have to cultivate within ourselves, and they actually go against everything we've learned in our lives. Everything our society and parents and teachers have probably taught us, which is not to put ourselves first.
Yeah, that's a tough one to swallow. But,
yes.
You know, society's virtues are the first set, and we're all about being good, and I'm using air quotes here in the studio, person instead of being an authentic person, which is the second set of the virtues.
And this causes us to be unhappy because we're trying to please everyone else around us, only we're usually not pleasing ourselves.
So you're saying we're supposed to please ourselves more? Bone chicka
yes, we're supposed to please ourselves.
Okay, let's just leave that right there.
Okay.
I'm not even going to go any further. Anyone
right, this is a G-rated
They
podcast.
can take their own reference and jokes from that. But before we get started with the podcast, Lita, let's just get everyone a little caught up on what's going on in this world and the Inspired Action Podcast.
Last week, we announced that we have a brand new Patreon page.
Woohoo!
And we actually had some people ask us about it. So what's a Patreon?
All right, cool. So the Patreon page that's a very good question. And I've been answering it about, 20 times this week. So if you're interested in checking out, it's a page that was created by the company called Patreon, and they have a lot of different platforms that you can go on there and donate to. And so we're on there, and you can support our little podcast or make a little donations or just check it out and read it, because we have a lot of cool stuff on there, and we have a lot of things that we're going to be giving away. And if you make a certain level, donate. You don't have to. The podcast is always going to be free, but if you want to donate a little bit, this is a place to do it. www.patreon.com/inspired action.
All right. That sounds great. And thank you to anyone who does support us on Patreon. And I mean, we're just really, really grateful in terms of being able to expand the podcast in so many ways.
Yeah. So, and also if you could take a quick minute after you look at the Patreon page and go to the iTunes and do a quick rate and review. If you like the podcast, give it a couple 5 stars there or whatever. And then maybe even kind of subscribe to it. on their feed. So you get
write a review.
Write
We
a review,
really need some
anything.
reviews. We're very close to making a big number in reviews.
It helps us appear in the search rankings on iTunes, and then even more people can find this podcast just like you.
So let's talk about our meditation app, the Inspired Action Podcast
Okay,
app.
let's talk about it.
And I just wanted to say we finished 2 new meditations that are now up on the app. So check it out. And if you don't have the app yet, please go to the App Store or Google Play and download it. It's really easy. And there are several free meditations, as always, and some premium ones too, meaning that there's a small subscription fee to the app.
Yeah, and are we going to have a meditation for each one of the virtues when we're done?
Yes.
Okay, so that's coming too. So keep an eye out for that.
And we have the first 2 up, courage and authority.
Fantastic. Let's also remind everyone about our new podcast on Fridays, which we're calling 5 Element Fridays, which is just a few minutes of 5 element fun that comes out on Fridays.
And if you haven't checked it out yet, you can just find it in the podcast feed. And this week we're posting the second in a new 5 element series on relationships. So this week we're going...
This is how the elements get along or don't. Dun, dun, dun. Just kidding, but not kidding. And this podcast is on water and fire, the 2 fire, the elements that...
Talk about some that might not get along.
Yeah.
Water puts out fire.
Dun, 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 dun. So yeah,
Okay.
So it's a good one.
Yes, it's a good one.
Oh, somehow I think you're going to say that about all of them, but it is a good one.
Yes. And I just love talking about the 5 elements. I love talking about alchemy, the ghost points, everything.
Yes, yes, yes. And as always, we encourage you to post your questions and suggestions to our Facebook group or our Instagram page, or you can even send us an email at questions@inspiredactionpodcast.com. And if we use one of those questions on the podcast, we will send you a free Inspired Action t-shirt.
Free.
And we'll let you know at the time which ones. We have a lot of different versions, but whatever we have, we will give you that option.
Yeah, we're working on a couple new ones, so we're excited.
All right.
All right, woohoo!
Let's get back into the flow of our topic today.
The flow.
Which is acceptance, the virtue of the water element. That's why I said flow.
I think they might have figured that out.
Yeah, go with the flow. All right, so why do you love this one, Lita?
I love this virtue because I can honestly say when I'm hanging out with my water friends, they are so chill and they make me feel like it's all good.
Me too. And I do love to feel that way. But the wood part of me always makes me feel like I want to improve things, maybe move things forward, move them along. For wood people in particular, that energy, I think acceptance is, I hate to say it, sometimes harder to accept than other virtues.
Yes, you can't accept acceptance.
Right, but just a little bit.
Well, it's interesting, though, that you say that because this virtue is really about peace. And I know, Jay, you and almost every wood person I know always say they're seeking peace above else. Yet, even so, you're always striving. Those woods, they're striving, they're growing. They're like the big trees growing in the forest. They can't ever stop seeking the higher heights.
Yeah, that is so true. And you said another word for this virtue is surrender. And to me, surrendering is like giving up. I'm going to say hope. And I know that's not what this virtue is about. But let's talk about that a little bit because it kind of went, when you said that to me.
Yes. So the virtue's acceptance, it's not a surrender to something you don't like or don't want. Mostly we use that word surrender when we're like under the gun, under fire, and you come out with your hands up and wave your white flag. But this is a different type of surrender, and I think that's why it's a confusing word. This is all about the fight and resistance that we've got in our lives. And the question is, what are you really fighting?
Yeah, most likely you're fighting within your own mind or your own fears, and there really isn't a physical reason to be fighting anything. In other words, we're creating our own battles in our own minds. That's usually what the situation is.
Exactly. And all that fight is stealing your peace of mind every day. So what you're really surrendering is the needless fight so that you can achieve peace.
Yeah, I think about this virtue, and it's really about stopping obsessive thinking because it doesn't help you in any way. One example would be to go over the conversation in your mind over and over and over, the one that you're going to have with your boss 100 times before you actually walk into your boss's office. So no, you really only have to think about it once, decide what you're going to say, then don't go over it over and over and over in your head. Instead, many of us think about obsessively until we make ourselves sick or maybe even physically sick due to the obsessive thinking. It's kind of crazy. This is really about obsessive thinking.
Yeah, stopping your obsessive thinking, because really, does it help you in any way to go over that conversation in your mind like 1,000 times, like the one you're going to have with your boss, tomorrow? And then you think about it and you think about it and you think about it. And it's like, you could really just think about it once and then stop thinking about it until the next day when you walk into the office. But instead, I would say the majority of us, I don't even know if there's any of us who don't have some of this, we think about it obsessively until we almost make ourselves sick. Or we even actually get physically sick due to the obsessive thinking and end up calling out sick to the office. It's crazy.
Cray. It is all a story, and a story that you can change.
Yeah. This virtue is really about you at a deep level of you, the water part. We are taught as children to trust. We trust our parents, we trust our teachers, we trust our religious leaders, but we all know that trusting others doesn't always end so good. Sometimes those seemingly kind and helpful elders do bad things or just don't have our best interests at heart.
So if we're taught to trust certain types of people and they really have nefarious intentions, we can get really hurt. We can be really hurt by this. So the fact that society teaches us to trust certain types of people can really mess up our abilities to find acceptance, and then that peace in our hearts is sometimes elusive.
Yeah, there's so many variations of this one. Like in the beginning, we're really naive, and this issue of naivete, of not understanding that all the seemingly good people in the world might not be that safe, and unless you've been hurt, you don't know that. So let's say you are that naive, and let's say someone good in your life, like a parent or a teacher, tells you that they know what's best for you and that you should trust them. And they tell you maybe what career you should have. Well, what if it's not the career you actually want, but are you supposed to trust them? So you listen to them and you get convinced and you go down that road. And then like 10, 15, 20 years later, you think, why did I do that? Why didn't I do the things I loved?
Yeah, now you've got a real challenge. I see it all the time when I'm coaching people. You learn you've learned trust, but not acceptance. Now you can see the difference there. So you've actually got to make these big changes in your life now, because before you can move into a peaceful state, you have to find your own authenticity. You can't find peace without being in a peaceful state, right?
Right. So you have to learn to develop. Now we're going to go through those virtues again. Courage. The virtue of courage is the first of the 5 Daoist virtues. So courage helps you go against the advice of your parents or teachers and do what feels right for you. Then you need to establish your own authority, the second virtue, and say to the world that you're going to make your own decisions and not go with someone else's decisions. Then you need to find the gratitude for what you already have in your life, even though you're not doing what you want to do, because until we find the gratitude, we often find ourselves in the same bad situations that we already created if we try to make a change. Then you need to find forgiveness for the people who led you astray and to see, they were probably doing their best, even if they led you down the wrong path. I mean, they probably thought they were helping you. And so you can forgive them, even though they basically messed up your life. And finally,
no big deal, right?
Yeah, no big deal. And finally, after that, you can surrender to your new path and not obsess about your discomfort of being in a situation you don't like. So instead, you envision the future you want and accept that you are moving toward it like a stream gently moving forward. You don't have to push or fight, but you let your water flow naturally, and that is a peaceful state of mind.
So if you have the mindset that what you want is coming to you, it's just around the corner, that bend in the water flow there, the stream, you just need to be open to it and in alignment energetically.
And the idea of being comfortable with loss is a critical component to this virtue of acceptance. Losing something, feels usually really, really bad, but it makes room for new things to come in our lives. Flowing water is always refreshing everything around it. Think about it. Stagnant water is disgusting and it's unwanted.
Nobody wants that.
Nobody wants like a swamp. But
wait a minute. Shrek was in the swamp.
well, that's true. Maybe, that's
Ogres like swamps.
Yeah, that's true. Ogres like swamps.
But other than ogres,
Skunk cabbage lives in swamps. They probably like swamps.
so maybe skunks too.
Maybe skunks too.
Because they probably eat that skunk cabbage.
I wonder.
Okay, so ogres and skunks, but that's it. No one else likes swamps.
Nobody else likes swamps.
So stagnant water, which equals swamps, nobody wants.
Well, as water flows, then that stagnant water moves out. You're basically losing the stagnant water. You can't hang on to it. So if we're constantly losing things, that means we're refreshing and things are flowing. And that means something new is flowing towards us. I think in a way, the best example is when someone's going through a divorce and they're really unhappy about it. That's a huge loss. If you've been married to someone for many, many years and suddenly they're gone,
it's like death as well.
It's really like death. It's a huge loss. And if they can't let go, it's like they're creating that swamp. The water's not flowing. But if they can let go, the water starts flowing. And it's almost guaranteed that this loss is going to open something up that's new. A new relationship maybe, or some other opportunity. Maybe traveling around the world or something like really amazing that never would have been possible with the former spouse.
Well, if you're comfortable with that loss, then you'll have no regrets. And regrets can be one of the biggest obstacles to inner peace. So you have to learn to move past those regrets.
Yeah, think about how much regret can just eat away at your inner peace. So it's definitely one of the things that this is all about. So that's what we mean by surrender. You're surrendering to the loss. You've already forgiven the people who may have hurt you. That's the middle virtue. And we discussed that in the last podcast.
Pod 61.
And now we're moving forward even further beyond the forgiveness. Another step. It's a lot to ask, but now you're accepting what you've lost and allowing something new to arise.
And the water element, they do this all the time. They do it the best. It's easy for them. When they're in a good place, they just allow their life to, go with the flow.
Go with the flow.
Go with the flow.
Unless they don't. Sometimes waters struggle as well. And if they're really struggling in life with a lot of fear and anxiety, like the rest of us, that acceptance is sometimes the furthest thing from where they are currently.
Yeah. Also, I think about sometimes I use it as frozen water.
Yes.
And then the stagnant water and then the flowing water. So there's a lot of different versions of the water, and they can really get tweaked, especially if they really base their entire life on trusting certain people.
I often say there really isn't a single person you can trust in your life. Not a single one except
yourself, right?
Yes.
I was waiting for that.
Yes.
Yourself.
Only yourself when you really get down to it, because even the most trustworthy person in your life still has to be authentically themselves. And if, in order for them to be their authentic selves, they have to put themselves first, and there's a conflict where they can't show up in your life the way you need them without totally compromising themselves, they should pick doing what's right for themselves over what's right for you.
Yeah. And you just said that really very nicely, but it's a very difficult concept for a lot of people to they can understand the theory, but the practice is really, hard for some people. And I see it all the time.
Imagine that you actually had someone in your life that you thought was completely trustworthy, and they claimed to be completely trustworthy. And they actually agreed and promised that they would do every single thing in their lives that you wanted them to do.
Like every single thing?
Yeah.
Like 100%.
100%. Not only would they do it, they wouldn't complain about it and tell you when they didn't want to do it. They would tell you, oh yeah, I want to do that. And they wouldn't show their true feelings about your ideas that they don't want.
So how can you trust that?
Exactly. So how do you think that's really going to work? And, people say we want to be able to trust someone, but really, in the end, I think you wouldn't actually want that. In fact, you'd be like, this isn't really fun. It's not challenging or interesting. Basically, we're asking people to even lie to us by saying, we need you to be completely 100% trustworthy.
Yeah, so how are you going to get acceptance if you can't get past that? If we were talking about a partner or a spouse, then that would be like really horrible.
Right. And so, how can you rewrite that story? So We so want our spouses to be like that, but then if they really were like that, it would be horrible.
Yeah, we want them to have their own identities, their own wishes, their own paths in life. And the truth is we want them to be true to us about how they feel. So if you have someone who violates this trust, it's hard to get past that for acceptance.
Yeah, we really actually in truth want the people in our lives to be their authentic selves, which means they're not always going to be trustworthy, which means they're not going to do what you want to do all the time.
That's right. And when we talk about the water trust, we want the water energy to evolve from trusting others to trusting the universe, to trusting the divine or God, or whatever words you want to put to choose in that sentence.
Right. And I just call it trust with a capital T. And this is the acceptance that we're talking about. Accepting that somehow, some way, you'll be all right. And somehow, some way, everything's going to work out as long as you allow and accept.
And that is the true surrender. That is the true peace.
That's what we mean by the word surrender. See how different that is than like putting up the white flag and giving up. So this is not that. This is the surrender to the flow. So this is the fifth virtue, as we said, and it's a doozy for some people. It can be really hard. So let's take some baby steps in our homework this week and break it down to make it easy.
Okay, that's a good idea. A little writing assignment, maybe in your journals, and hopefully the words will just flow. Is that too hokey?
Yes.
A little too hokey? The words will flow about the water? No.
I like that idea. How about let's think of something or someone you lost. You know, you've had a hard time accepting how it may be played out, the person or thing that you lost, and maybe you still have regrets over it.
Or it could be regrets over what you may or may not have done. So you can imagine yourself accepting that loss so that you can say what it is or what it was that has really got you upset.
You can even imagine that, you know, this hole that is in your life that this loss created.
I've heard people say hole in their heart.
Hole in their heart. Yeah. Maybe it's being filled with something new. Imagine it being filled with something new. Imagine the good that could come out of it. What space has opened up for something new because you lost that? What exciting things could happen instead? So
you can take that example, write it out in your journal. That's a great idea. And maybe you can have that like water under the bridge. Hey, maybe that's why the expression actually works here.
Yes. And also, I'm thinking another assignment is to look back at your past and really look at how things have flowed in your life. The good stuff, the challenging stuff, and remember some of the losses you've had in the past and what new things and maybe better things came as a result of that loss.
Yeah, I think we're trying to attempt here to create more trust that even the losses are part of your journey and there's a natural ebb and flow in your life. So something bad is often followed by, guess what? Something good. So can you trust that even the losses are part of your own journey and you can surrender to that journey yourself?
Wherever it takes you is exactly where you need to be. So this is a great place to end the podcast. Please accept this as the end of the podcast. Acceptance.
Yes, and that the next one will be even better.
Yes.
So
Who
there
knows?
you go. Let this one go and a better one will come next time.
All right.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Happy trails to you until we meet again.
You've been listening to the Inspired Action Podcast, and you've reached the end. Woohoo! Why not celebrate a little bit and click that subscribe button right there. We love having you with us on this journey, and we want it to continue.
You can also rate and review this podcast, and if you have already, thank you so much. We read all reviews, and your reviews help other people find this podcast as well. You can also be a part of this podcast yourself by submitting a voice recording message and emailing it to us at lita@inspiredactionpodcast.com or jay@inspiredactionpodcast.com.
And if you want, you can join our Facebook group or follow us on Instagram.
Join us next week for another Inspired Action conversation, and thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening, and remember to hug the dog.